At my daughter's wedding, I reached for the chair set aside for me. Just as I began to lower myself, her fiancé yanked it back with a smirk. My body crashed onto the polished floor, the sound echoing under the chandeliers. Gasps rippled through the hall, and then laughter. Real cruel laughter. And over it all, his voice cut like a blade. "Your place is on the floor, old man." Before I continue, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. That humiliation should have broken me, but instead, it set something deep inside me ablaze. I stayed on the floor longer than I needed to, not because I couldn't stand, but because I wanted everyone there to feel the weight of what had just happened. The scrape of the marble against my palms burned, but the real fire was behind my eyes. I rose slowly, every joint aching but my face calm. My daughter, Natalie, dropped her bouquet and ran toward me, her hands frantic on my arm. "Dad, are you okay?" Her voice cracked with panic, but her groom, Tyler, only grinned, brushing off the gasps with a dismissive shrug. He leaned closer, just enough for me to hear, and muttered, "Remember your place." I didn't reply. Sometimes silence is louder than rage. I straightened my jacket, brushed the dust from my trousers, and stood tall in front of the crowd. My years had carved lines across my face, my hands were scarred from decades of honest work, but in that moment, every eye was on me. I walked to the chair, lifted it myself, and set it back in place with a deliberate scrape that echoed louder than Tyler's mockery. Then I sat, dignity reclaimed inch by inch. Natalie's face was pale as she looked between me and the man she was about to marry. I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of doubt. The wedding ceremony pressed on, the officiant stumbling through his words, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But nothing was the same. The guests shifted in their seats, murmurs running beneath the music. Some were ashamed they had laughed, others tried to erase the moment as quickly as possible. But I knew what I had felt, the way Tyler's smirk had twisted, the way he had enjoyed it. That wasn't nervousness. That was cruelty, the kind that doesn't stop. I sat through the vows, through the applause, through the shallow clinking of champagne glasses. My daughter smiled weakly, but her eyes never fully met mine. And Tyler, he strutted, convinced he had proved himself the stronger man. What he didn't realize was that he had lit a fire he couldn't control. As the music swelled and guests poured into the garden for photographs, I slipped away. My legs carry me past the roses and champagne fountains, past the chatter and cameras, out into the quiet of the street. My hands trembled not from age, but from restraint. Every scar on my palms told me the same truth. I had survived worse, and I would survive this. But I also knew something Tyler didn't. Cruelty has a way of catching up to the ones who wield it. It tests the ground until the ground itself gives way. As I leaned against my truck, the cool spring air brushing across my face, I thought of Natalie at 6 years old, sitting in the small wooden chair I had built for her in the garage so she could hand me wrenches while I fixed engines. She used to smile then, proud to belong in my world of grease and steel. Now she stood in a gown beside a man who had just shoved her father to the floor. My chest ached, not from a fall, but from the fear that she had built her future on a crack that would only widen. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered a vow to myself, one I had made long ago to my late wife, Linda, the night our daughter was born. I will protect her always. And now, as the city lights blurred past my windshield, I knew that vow was about to be tested in ways neither of us could have imagined. The night after the wedding, I sat in my garage, the smell of oil and dust grounding me in a world that still made sense. My old tools lined the bench, each scar on the wood a memory of something built, something fixed, something earned. My Harley sat half-assembled in the corner, chrome gleaming under the fluorescent light. I had started rebuilding it years ago, never in a rush, just one bolt, one gasket at a time. Tonight, though, my hands didn't want to work. They wanted to shake, to clench into fists. Tyler's smirk replayed over and over in my mind, the sound of the laughter echoing in my ears. "Your place is on the floor, old man." I tightened a bolt harder than I needed to, the wrench slipping, skin splitting across my knuckles. The sting brought me back to the present. I stared at the blood, then wiped it on a rag, my breath ragged. My pride wasn't what hurt the most. It was Natalie's face. The way she looked at me as though something inside her had cracked, the bouquet slipping from her hands, petals scattered across the aisle like tears. That was the wound I couldn't stop bleeding. Around midnight, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, the kind that tastes like burnt earth, and sat at the workbench staring at the photograph pinned above it. Linda, smiling in her wedding dress. God, she had been radiant. Her eyes shone with a kind of faith that made you believe in forever. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, I tried, Linda. I'm still trying. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew trying wasn't enough. This wasn't about me. It was about Natalie walking into a life with a man who had just proven his character in the cruelest way. Men like Tyler don't stop at chairs. They test boundaries, one humiliation at a time, until they own the ground under your feet. And my daughter was about to give him her whole life. The next morning, the neighborhood was waking when I stepped out onto the porch. Kids ran down the sidewalk with backpacks, dogs barked at delivery trucks, and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery floated on the breeze. Honest life. Life that Tyler sneered at. I sat on the steps, sipping coffee from the same chip mug I'd used for 20 years. My neighbor Tom, a Vietnam vet, shuffled over with his own steaming cup. He lowered himself into the chair beside me, joints cracking, his weathered face unreadable. People are talking, Gus, he muttered after a long sip. Not in a good way. I frowned. What do you mean? He shifted uncomfortably, then sighed. Word is your daughter's new husband has been bragging downtown. Called her an upgrade, called you obsolete. The word landed like a punch. I set my cup down slowly, forcing calm. Tom glanced at me, then away. You didn't hear it from me. He stood and walked back to his porch, leaving me with a storm in my chest. Obsolete. The arrogance of it. Later that afternoon, as I was locking up the garage, my phone buzzed. A notification. Social media, something I rarely touched. Natalie had set up the account for me years ago, wanting me to see her posts when she traveled. This one wasn't from her. It was tagged. A photo of Tyler in his tailored suit, grinning, champagne glass raised. The caption read, she's perfect, sweet, trusting. And her father? Just a simple man. Doesn't matter. He won't interfere. My grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. Simple man. I set the phone down gently on the bench, though every instinct screamed to crush it. I stood there, staring at my hands. Scarred, crooked, strong. Hands that had built an honest life out of nothing but grit. Hands that had raised a daughter alone after Linda passed. Hands that had carried brothers through fire overseas. Simple? No. Tested. Proven. I flexed my fingers, the blood still dried in the creases from the night before, and whispered, we'll see about that. That evening, Natalie stopped by the house. She always came unannounced, the way she had since she was little. I heard her voice before I saw her. Dad, you in there? I stepped out from behind the Harley, wiping grease from my palms. She was standing in the doorway, still in her work clothes, hair tied back, eyes tired but glowing. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. There you are, she said, crossing the room and hugging me tight. I held her, breathing in the faint perfume she wore, the same one Linda had once used. You missed more of the reception, she said softly. People noticed. I shrugged. Crowds aren't for me. She pulled back, searching my face. You're not angry, are you? Her eyes were wide, almost pleading. I shook my head. I've been through worse. But she wasn't convinced. I could see it in the way she bit her lip, the way she hugged herself with her arms. Tyler says you don't understand him, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. And do you? She faltered, her eyes darting to the floor. Silence stretched. Then, barely audible, she said, sometimes he goes too far. But he doesn't mean it. I laid my hand gently on her shoulder. Natalie, was pulling that chair away from me at your wedding too far? Or was it a test? She froze, her breath caught. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The seed of doubt was enough. She hugged me again, tighter this time, her voice trembling. I love you, Dad. I kissed the top of her head, whispering, always princess. After she left, the garage felt heavier, the silence thicker. I sat back on the stool, staring at the Harley, the chrome catching the fading light. And then I whispered to the photograph of Linda. She's starting to see it. She just needs time. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. From an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Sam Turner. We had served together overseas. Now he was a lawyer. His message was simple. Need to talk. Urgent. It's about Tyler. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. The past had just knocked on my door. I didn't sleep that night. Sam's message kept replaying in my head. simple words that carried the weight of something bigger. Need to talk. Urgent. It's about Tyler. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the house creaking with age, the clock ticking too loudly on the mantel. I stared at my phone, the glow of the screen painting my face pale in the dark. Memories of Sam came rushing back. Sand, smoke, gunfire, the sound of his voice yelling through static-filled radios. He had been steady then, the man you trusted when everything collapsed around you. If he said something was urgent now, I knew it was a noise. It was a signal. At dawn, I brewed coffee, so strong it bit my tongue, and drove into the city to meet him. The streets of Brooklyn were waking, shopkeepers lifting grates, kids dragging backpacks, buses hissing at every stop. I parked my truck in front of a diner we used to haunt when we were young and broke, back before the war took us to desserts half a world away. The sign flickered, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee wrapping me like an old blanket. Sam was already there, tucked in a booth by the window. He looked older than I remembered, hair silver at the edges, face carved with lines of years, lived hard. But his eyes were the same, sharp, clear, unblinking. He stood as I walked in, gripping my hand firmly, the shake of a man who still remembered brotherhood. "Gus," he said, voice low, like even the walls might be listening. We slid into the booth, the vinyl squeaking under our weight. The waitress poured coffee without asking, recognizing the look of men who needed it. For a long moment, we just sat there, steam rising between us. Finally, Sam leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's about Tyler Hale." I clenched my jaw, but said nothing. He studied me, then nodded slowly. "I thought so. You've seen the cracks already, haven't you?" I met his eyes steady. More than cracks. He humiliated me at my daughter's wedding, in front of everyone. And she's still trying to defend him. Sam sighed, shaking his head. "That's how men like him work. Charm on the surface, rot underneath. They make you doubt your own eyes." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness anchor me. "Tell me what you know." He slid a folder across the table. It was thin, manila, but it might as well have been a grenade. "He's reckless," Sam said flatly. "Financial deals, cutting corners, stepping on anyone in his way. He nearly cost a firm millions last year. They buried it to protect themselves, but inside, people know. His name's mud in certain circles." I opened the folder, scanning the pages. Contracts, emails, notes scribbled in margins. Tyler's signature jumped out at me like a stain. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Sam's eyes darkened. "Because you deserve to know the kind of man your daughter just married. And because men like him, they always leave a trail. This is just the beginning." My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to rip the papers in half, throw them back, scream that I didn't need proof when I had already lived it on the marble floor of that wedding hall. But instead, I leaned back, breathing slow, steady. "Natalie won't believe me," I said quietly. "Not without seeing it herself." Sam nodded. "Then let her see. Don't push. Just be ready." The waitress refilled our cups, oblivious to the storm at our table. Outside, the city carried on, horns blaring, taxis honking, people rushing to offices where they thought their world mattered more than anyone else's. But at that booth, time slowed. I stared at the folder again, then slid it back to Sam. "Keep it," I said. "If the day comes, I'll need it. But not yet." He studied me, then smiled faintly. "Still the patient one, huh? Always waiting for the right moment." I didn't smile back. Patience wasn't easy when it was your daughter's happiness on the line. We parted outside, the city noise swallowing our goodbye. I drove back to Brooklyn, the folder's absence heavy in my mind. That evening, Natalie came by again. She always did, like the house itself still pulled her home. She found me in the garage, sleeves rolled up, grease staining my hands. "Dad," she said softly, leaning in the doorway. "I need to ask you something." I wiped my hands on a rag, heart tightening. "Anything." She hesitated, biting her lip the way she did when she was a little girl, trying to admit she broke a vase. "Tyler says you don't like him. He says you're jealous, that you think he's not good enough for me." I felt the words cut, sharp and deliberate. Jealous. That's the poison men, like Tyler, spread. I set the rag down, walked over, and placed my hands gently on her shoulders. "Natalie," I said, my voice steady, "do you believe that?" Her eyes flickered, uncertain. "I don't know. I want to believe you're just worried. But he says you're stuck in the past. That you don't understand the life we're building." I swallowed hard. This was the test. I couldn't explode. I couldn't shout. That would only prove his lies. So I looked her straight in the eye and said softly, "Princess, would has jealousy ever build a life? I raised you without it. I worked 2 jobs so you'd never feel less than anyone. I gave everything I had so you'd grow up strong. That's not jealousy. That's love." Her lips trembled. She blinked hard, fighting tears. "I know, Dad," she whispered. I don't know what to think anymore." I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. Her perfume, her trembling shoulders, her heart beating against mine. It was all Linda again, years collapsing in an instant. I whispered into her hair, "Think for yourself, Natalie. Don't let anyone else tell you who I am." She clung to me, and for a moment I felt her walls crack. Then she pulled back, wiping her eyes quickly. "I should go," she said, forcing a smile. I watched her leave, the silence of the garage closing in around me. The Harley gleamed unfinished, like a symbol waiting for its moment. I sat on the stool, staring at the empty doorway, and whispered to Linda's photo, "She's slipping, but she's not lost. Not yet." Later that night, as I was locking up, I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, confident. I opened the door slowly. Tyler stood there, tailored suit, perfect smile, eyes cold as stone. He didn't wait for an invitation. He shoved past me, shoes striking the hardwood like gunfire. "We need to talk," he said. Tyler stood in my living room like he owned it, shoulders squared, hands in his pockets, as if my home were just another boardroom he could dominate. The smirk he wore wasn't the playful charm my daughter had fallen for. It was something darker, sharper, the smile of a man who had never been told no in his life. I closed the door quietly behind him, my palms steady even as the air between us grew heavy. "You came uninvited," I said, my voice calm, measured. He shrugged. "I don't need an invitation. We're family now. Or haven't you figured that out yet?" His words dripped with arrogance, the kind that expected people to nod along. I didn't. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What do you want?" He stepped closer, eyes narrowing, tone dropping low. "I want you to stop poisoning Natalie against me." The accusation was sharp, but didn't cut the way he wanted it to. I let it hang in the air for a moment before answering. "If she's starting to doubt you, that's not because of me. That's because of you." His jaw tightened. He stepped forward until we were nearly face to face, trying to use his height, his youth, as a weapon. "You think you can intimidate me with your old war stories? With your garage and your grease-stained hands? You're obsolete, Gus. She's mine now, and if you don't back off, you'll lose her forever." I studied him in silence, not blinking, not flinching. I'd stood inches from men with rifles and explosives strapped to their chests, men whose eyes held nothing but death. Tyler's performance was theater compared to that. Still, his words burned. Lose her forever. That was the threat. Not to my pride, but to my daughter's future. "Natalie isn't property," I said finally. "She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to herself." His laugh was brittle, hollow. "You really don't get it, do you? This is the world we live in now. Money, power, influence, that's what matters. Love, respect, honor, those are just stories men like you tell yourselves when you've got nothing else left." He pulled his phone from his pocket, waving it like a weapon. "One text, and I can make her believe you're jealous, bitter, trying to break us apart. Who do you think she'll believe? Her husband or her washed-up old man?" My fists tightened at my sides, but I didn't move. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I took one slow step forward, so close now I could see the faint sheen of sweat forming at his temples. "You think you understand power," I said softly, "but you've never had to carry a man through fire. You've never had to rebuild your life with your own 2 hands. Power isn't a suit, Tyler. It's not a paycheck. Power is what's left when the world takes everything from you, and you still stand." His smirk faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, turned on his heel, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The house fell silent again, but wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavy, waiting for the next strike. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the photograph of Linda on the mantel, her smile frozen in time. "I promised you," I whispered. "I promised I'd protect her. And I will." The days that followed were thick with whispers. In my neighborhood, in the city, at the edge of every conversation, I heard Tyler's name. Men at the hardware store muttered about his arrogance downtown, how he'd been boasting about leaving Brooklyn behind, how he called Natalie his biggest acquisition. Women at the bakery shook their heads, saying they'd overheard him bragging that he'd married up, that her father was just an old mechanic with nothing to offer. Each word was a spark, and sparks build fires. Natalie came by less often, but when she did, I saw the change. The doubt had grown in her eyes. The cracks were showing. She asked questions she hadn't asked before. "Dad, do you think he loves me?" My answer was simple. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't own. Love builds. She didn't reply, but I saw the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She hugged me tighter than usual before leaving, and I knew she felt the weight of truth pressing down on her. It was the wedding reception that finally shattered everything. The room was filled with crystal chandeliers, linen tables, the hollow laughter of guests sipping champagne. I kept to the edges, listening, watching. When I rose to shift my chair, Tyler yanked it out from under me. My body hit the floor with a crack that silenced the music. Gasps, then laughter, then his voice, dripping with cruelty. "Your place is on the floor, old man." For a moment, I stayed down, not because I couldn't rise, but because I wanted the silence to grow, the weight of his arrogance to choke the room. Then I stood slowly, deliberately, every inch of me radiating the dignity he could never touch. Natalie rushed to me, her bouquet forgotten, tears streaming. Tyler stood smug, his smile thin, his arrogance blinding him to the storm he had just unleashed. And then boots. The sound of boots cutting across marble, deliberate, commanding. A man in his 60s, shoulders still squared, eyes still sharp, stepped into the hall. Tyler's father. He looked at me and froze, color draining from his face. "Sergeant," he whispered. Recognition detonated across the room. Years collapsed into that single moment. He stepped forward, his voice louder now, trembling with gratitude. "This man saved my life." Gasps rippled through the guests. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Tyler's smugness drained into pale horror. Natalie's tears turned to pride as she clutched my arm. And me? I stood tall, silent, letting the truth do what fists never could. The applause started soft, hesitant, then swelled until the hall thundered with it. Not for Tyler. Not for his spectacle. For dignity. For honor. For the truth that arrogance could never bury. Natalie turned to me, her voice breaking but strong. "Dad, you kept your promise." I touched the chain around my neck, Linda's ring warm against my chest, and whispered back, "Always." So if you've listened this far, I want to thank you. Stories like this aren't just about betrayal. They're about strength, about standing tall when the world tries to put you down. If you believe dignity still matters, hit that like button. If you've ever fought for respect, subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because stories like this aren't mine alone. They belong to all of us.